Well, my grandfather clock just tolled 12 times. So that means that it's noon and it's time to begin our Saturday sharing. So glad to have you with us. This is a resource of the United Church of Christ Musicians Association. We're an organization that provides resources, educations, conferences, and a number of other things for other church musicians, not necessarily just United Church of Christ musicians, but musicians who lead music ministry in a lot of different places. And we're so happy to have you with us. I'd like to ask our chaplain to give us a little bit of a prayer before we start this morning. Peter, if you would please bring us in.
Please join me and be fully present. O great mystery, please receive our thanks that we can communicate today. Let the anointing of your Holy One be on Amanda as she teaches us and guides us. Prepare our hearts to repent in the fullest sense of the way and learn new things. And, O great one, bless our time together and help us to share and be at peace when we depart, as we know these topics stir up our hearts greatly. We thank in your most holy name. Amen.
Thank you, Peter. So I'm happy to introduce Amanda Udis-Kessler to talk about our singing welcome as an anti-racist practice. Amanda.
Thanks. I'm delighted to be here, and thank you all for being here as well. I'm just going to quickly go through the agenda. We are going to start by watching a video of one of my pieces of music. This is called "Oh My Shepherd," and I'll come back to introducing it in just a second. After the video, I will give a hopefully fairly short talk about this notion of singing welcome as an anti-racist practice. I'm going to invite everyone into a writing exercise for just a few minutes. And then whatever time we have left will be open for questions and answers, discussion, and so on. It'll be an opportunity to consider the materials I had sent ahead of time if you've read them, or use the time however you like. And then Jim will close us out. So the video we're about to watch is of a piece of mine called "Oh My Shepherd." It was written on commission for actually a New England UCC congregation. And it is a sort of a queering of the 23rd Psalm that imagines it not as a song of an oppressed people, but as the song of people who are oppressors and who are trying to repent of that and do better. So I'm going to ask you as you listen to it to pay attention to how it makes you feel, especially the text. After we are done listening to it, we are going to sit silently for about a minute to reflect on our experiences. And then after that time, I will talk for a little while and we'll go on. I want you to be aware that you received the text as part of the materials packet when you signed up, so you're welcome at any time to go back and look at that text again. But so now let's engage with some of the discomfort of addressing racism by sitting with my piece, "Oh My Shepherd."
Oh, my shepherd, lead me, guide me, haunt me, push me, move my heart. When I ache for stiller waters, keep me on my feet. Bring me to the street, help me not retreat. Lead me in the path of justice, send me to resist the violence. Tempted as I am to silence, comfort me and raise my voice. my shepherd, I have walked through widest valleys far too long, fearing what I thought was evil, causing harm and doing wrong. Help me sing a different song. Where I stumble, make me strong. I have lingered at the table, safe and sated, unaware, failing in my joy to notice all the ones who weren't there. All the ways the world's unfair. All the times I didn't care. Oh, my shepherd, fill my cup with heartbreak so it overflows. Pour the oil of deep compassion down upon me till I know how to face the devastation, how to work to heal the nation, how to strive for reparation. Oh, my shepherd, may I be a shepherd of my very own, leading others into goodness, guiding others into mercy, living proof that you have called us to rebuild your shattered home as a place where all of us shall dwell as one our whole lives long.
So when I first came up with the title of this session, I didn't realize quite how highfalutin the language was. This idea of singing welcome as an anti-racist practice. What does that even mean? And so I wanted to spend a little time today talking about what I think that means, say a little bit about welcome, say a little bit about racism, say a little bit about anti-racism, and then kind of move us into some collective activities. What I mean by singing welcome is the idea of using worship music as a way of engaging in radical hospitality, assuring people that they are not just welcome, quote unquote, in our congregations, but cherished, honored, respected, and loved in them. and doing this specifically through music. There are many other ways we can welcome people, or many forms of radical hospitality, but music, I think, is particularly powerful. And if you're here today because you are a church musician or because you just love music in church, you know how powerful music is. It's so deeply connected to our emotions. It is deeply connected to our integrity. Most of us can't really sing hymn texts with which we disagree too strongly. It feels strange to do that. And that leads me to think music has something to do with our integrity. There's this idea that singing is quote unquote praying twice. That phrase has been attributed to St. Augustine. I've since read that it probably was created by Trappist monks in Utah, of all things. But nonetheless, the idea that singing is praying twice is intuitively powerful and meaningful. When we sing, we either are singing in a pretty disconnected way, or we're really singing from our hearts. And a lot of times in worship, we are really singing from our hearts. So singing welcome, singing radical hospitality is something we can do as part of our own spiritual journey, as part of our justice journey. And when we welcome people, we may be welcoming individual people, but also we can sing welcome specifically to people who are members of devalued groups. Chaplain Stickney before mentioned a hymn of mine, Queerly Beloved, which is a piece that sings welcome to and actually sings welcome from LGBTQ plus people in our religious communities. In the same way, those of us who are white can sing welcome to members of Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities. I'll use the phrase BIPOC to sort of capture all of those different identities. So then, why do we need to sing welcome? Why do we need to practice radical hospitality when it comes to race? Now, I'm not looking at who is in the room right now. This might be a racially diverse group, but what leads me to want to do this work with the UCC is my experience that the UCC is pretty white. And the work I do around racism and anti-racism is really largely meant for white people such as myself. Anyone obviously is welcome to be here, and I hope everyone here will get something out of it. But mostly for the moment, I'm talking to other European descended white people on the Zoom in the room. So race. Race is not biologically real. It's not, you might say, genetically or genomically real. All of us are human beings, and yet race is profoundly and deeply socially real. And I'm saying that as a sociologist, in that our race, how people perceive us racially, has a huge amount to do with the opportunities we have in the world, how well we're treated, whether we're believed or not, whether we're harmed or not. And so when we talk about racism, what I really mean are beliefs, values, assumptions, words, and actions that devalue, morally exclude, and or harm people based on a racial group to which they belong or to which we think they belong. And so racism can be a matter of an individual interaction. It can be a matter of how an institution practices hiring or how it treats people in one way or another. And so if that's racism, then anti-racism describes beliefs, values, words, and actions that challenge racism in any way. And again, that might be an individual challenge. It might be a collective challenge. It might be choosing to confront someone who says something racist. It might be choosing to make a hiring decision that lifts up specifically someone from a BIPOC community in a hiring situation. Lots and lots of different ways of being in the world can be anti-racist. But for us to choose to be anti-racist, we have to understand some things about how racism works. And mostly, we have to understand just how taken for granted racism is in our society. Racism is the normal. everyday practice of a huge amount of our society. Racism explains how we can have some of the political things going on today that we have. Racism explains how large-scale practices like segregation, racial segregation, can persist over generations, so from parents to children to their children and so on. And so anti-racist practices are specifically those actions that we can engage in individually and collectively that challenge racism in any and all of its forms. And obviously today, mostly I'm going to be having us think about challenging racism through anti-racist practices in our church lives, and especially in our musical lives at church. So you're welcome to extend this to church liturgy or to think about it in terms of faith formation. There's plenty of places we can do this. But because of who's gathered today, we're mostly thinking about church music. So because of how deeply racism is built into our society, into our culture, into our institutions, and into so many of our daily interactions, being anti-racist takes a lot of effort. We might think of racism as the path of least resistance. If we just go on about our days and we don't do anything about racism, other people will absolutely make sure that racism keeps happening. So anti-racism is a path of great resistance in the face of racism as the path of least resistance. I think if Jesus were here today, he would understand racism as the broad way and anti-racism as the narrow way, the hard path, but the path that leads to life. And so when I talk about singing Welcome as an anti-racist practice, even though I haven't yet said anything in any detail about what I mean by that practically, what it is it's our attempt to strenuously engage in repentance for racism and work against racism. And by repentance, just to be really clear, I don't mean particularly feeling bad about ourselves or feeling contrite. I mean what I think Jesus meant by repentance, which is turning around, changing direction, getting a new perspective on things. And when we think seriously enough about how racism works, when we understand it, when we see how we ourselves, in fact, can be complicit in it, and believe me, it makes me just as uncomfortable to say that as it makes any of you to hear it, I promise. But once we really grapple with racism, we can start asking, what do we do about it? How do we work against it? How do we contribute or co-create this beloved community, this kingdom of the holy that Jesus was on about? And I think working against racism is part of creating that. So now what I want to do is talk just a little bit more. I want to say a bit about the idea of discomfort in our work against racism. And then I want to just really briefly reference one of the little pieces of the packet I sent out having to do with the use of Black music. But first, let's talk a little bit about the notion of discomfort, because I think discomfort plays an important role in singing Welcome as an anti-racist practice. Some of you might have read essays I've written recently for the UCCMA journal, and where I've talked a little bit about discomfort in related contexts, not this context, and why discomfort is important and why we have it. So let's just be really honest about one thing. We live in a really individualistic society. We live in a society that is pretty fragile about naming racism, and in which most people are extremely uncomfortable owning that there could be systemic racism and owning that we could play any role in it at all. And there are certain reasons for this. So one of them is that the narrative that we have about what racism looks like in our society that many of us have inherited, and here I'm indebted to the anti-racist trainer Robin DiAngelo for this language. She talks about the good-bad binary of racism. We have this idea that only certain people are racists, that only bad people are racists, that racists are bad people, and that you can tell who a racist is because they're probably physically harming BIPOC people. They're probably marching in protests, waving tiki torches, yelling, "You will not replace us." They are probably people in Congress making laws, making it harder to be a BIPOC person in our society. We have this sense that we know who the racists are and we're not them. And when we think about racism that way, that there are good people and bad people, only the bad people are racists. Good people are not racist. We are good people, so we are not racist. Now, that might help us feel a little bit better, but it doesn't actually help us understand racism or work against it very effectively. And so once we really start grappling with the extent to which racism permeates our society, even those of us who are the best intentioned people, who would never harm anyone, those of us who are white, who have participated in civil rights marches or who have protested in Black Lives Matter protests, those of us who are committed to reading all the good books about what racism is and how to work against it. Those of us who are committed to programming racially diverse music in our congregations and so on. We really don't want to think of ourselves as racist because, again, we've identified racist or racism with certain kinds of people. And so it's very uncomfortable for us to say our society is racist. All of us are products of our society. And so at least to some degree, all of us are racist. And again, if that feels uncomfortable to you, I promise it feels just as uncomfortable to me. And I've been leading these kinds of workshops for years. But this discomfort can actually help us. I think it's a spiritual challenge. I think it's a spiritual opportunity for us to say we benefit, we who are white, benefit from racism is simply to describe something that's true. It is not to condemn ourselves. It is not to beat our chests or wail. It is simply to say racism benefits all white people. If we're white, we benefit from racism. We have to just accept and acknowledge that. And that then frees us to ask, what can we do to work against racism? But until we acknowledge how it benefits us, we probably are not really going to be able to work against it very effectively. The other thing is, if I'm honest, I was raised, and sociologists would say I was socialized to be racist. I was taught to have certain negative thoughts or impressions or assumptions about members of BIPOC communities. For those of you who are fans of the musical South Pacific, and I bet there's a couple of you out there, you might remember that there's a song that begins, you've got to be taught to be afraid of people whose skin is a different shade and people whose eyes are oddly made. You've got to be carefully taught. And we have all been carefully taught. So with all of that, we are then welcome to figure out, does this topic make us uncomfortable, and what do we do about that? So when I've written about comfort and discomfort in our music lives in church, again, mostly for our journal, I've argued that singing what I would call insider music is comfortable and affirming. Singing the music of our tradition that was largely written by European descended white people, singing people that reminds us of the past, that binds us back to the historic church, can be very comfortable and very affirming. I'm not saying we shouldn't do it, but it's only part of what we do in our music lives. We also sing music that draws us into the future, that demands something of us, that challenges us, that calls us to justice, that calls us to take up our cross daily. So again, taking up our cross daily does not mean that we go get ourselves physically killed. It means that on a daily basis, we seek the betterment of all people, even when that means denying ourselves in some way. And this vision, which is part of Jesus's call, is an invitation to all of us. So as I wrap up this little piece on discomfort, I invite you to think for just a moment about whether my piece, "Oh My Shepherd," made you uncomfortable at all. It makes me uncomfortable every single time I listen to it. Writing it was miserable, I'll tell you that, but I'm glad I wrote it. If it made you uncomfortable, what made you uncomfortable about it? Why did it make you uncomfortable? So that's just something for you to ponder. I'm not going to ask anyone to answer that question aloud. And I'll say one more thing about discomfort, which is that we have an invitation to engage with and become comfortable with our discomfort, especially as we experience it in our bodies. So again, many of us who are white, and this might be different depending on where in the country we're from, a lot of us find it really easy to live in our heads. We are great with ideas. We are great with debates and discussions. But not all of us are equally comfortable in our bodies, and not all of us are equally comfortable dealing with discomfort in our bodies. And so that is an invitation I think we have. The last thing I want to say before I turn us to a writing exercise is to just briefly reference this little essay that I included in your packet called Contextual Use of Black Worship Music. So I spent about 30 years with the Unitarian Universalists before I hopped over to the UCC, and in both venues, I have seen Black worship music in all white or predominantly white congregations used in a range of ways. It can be used in ways that are careless and exploitative. It can actually be a kind of cultural appropriation, or we can use it humbly and respectfully. We can use it as a way of moving toward the extravagant hospitality that I think we all somewhere in there really yearn to offer. And so there are various ways we can think about responsible use of Black church music in white congregations. What I've given you are some ideas about how we might use Black worship music contextually, which is to say, really understanding where it comes from, what its history is, how it's used now, and sharing that information in our use of it. I'm not going to say more about that because I actually think the little essay is kind of sufficient for explaining what I'm trying to get at. And if you haven't read it, I invite you to read it at your leisure. But it's a practice I invite all of us to contemplate doing and to ask ourselves, how might we use Black worship music contextually in our local worship contexts with all of the local culture, local expectations, local rituals, local personalities, local politics? How might we do that? So that's an invitation for all of us. The last thing I want to do before we open this up for a discussion or questions and answers is to take about 5 minutes for a writing exercise. You can do this on your computer, you can do it with a pen and paper, whatever you like. You can even just have it be an intellectual, kind of mental exercise if you prefer. But here's the question. What can you do in your congregation to use your music program to work against racism? Now, I'm going to read that again, but before I do, let me assure you, I'm not asking any of us to share our answers with anyone. This is just a private writing exercise. You're welcome to talk about it in the Q&A if you like, but you don't have to. This really is just an opportunity for you to take a few minutes, reflect on the last half hour, and then ask, what is my next step? How can I contribute to singing welcome in my congregation? How can I contribute to anti-racism or opposing racism in my congregation? So let's take about 5 minutes, at which point I will then call us back and we will spend the rest of our time in our Q&A and discussion. Okay, well, if you're still writing, why don't you wrap up your last sentence or so, and then we'll open it up for our conversation. Okay, I hope everyone will come off mute now. I've done more than enough talking. I would love to hear how this is landing for people, what thoughts they have, what ideas they have, what questions they have, what objections they have.
Well, I'll give a start here. Couple of things. One of the things you mentioned about the spirit of being uncomfortable. And I have to say that your piece, Oh My Shepherd, is uncomfortable in so many different ways that it's I'm just amazed as I think about it of how it's all been put together. It's uncomfortable because the tonality, the sound of the accompaniment is very disconcerting. It's in a minor mode, and it's very it has that pathos that you get when you hear that right out of the chute. And secondly, much of today's music, especially popular music, has this hook in it that people grab onto, and that it becomes part where you just sing that part of the song. You're singing along. You're thinking your music was like a stream of consciousness. Is that there was nothing to really latch on. There was that one section, Oh My Shepherd, where that was about it. Everything else was like just following the story. So the only thing you could do was focus on the words. And that was an amazing thing for me to experience. It speaks to me on a number of different levels. But I just wanted to make that as an observation, and I'll hope someone else will be able to provide some other type of discussions.
Sure, Dorothy or Dusty?
I'm Dorothy. This is Dusty. What struck me as I was trying to write my thoughts is that needing to get uncomfortable to work harder, to have wider resources and deeper resources and understanding about our resources. So my final thought during the writing time was, interesting, to walk the narrow path, we have to broaden our resources. So that was where my thoughts led.
I love that. That's a great paradox. Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. So what I wrote was, to walk the narrow path, we have to broaden our resources, minds, and efforts. So our apologies about our late arrival, but thank you. What we got was awesome.
You can watch the whole video afterwards.
I know,
and catch
I
the
know.
beginning.
I'm glad. Yeah.
I wonder if discomfort is kind of like the elephant in the room we don't discuss. And so the best just to avoid it and don't bring up anything political, don't bring up anything that's an issue. And we need to learn how to do that comfortably with each other. That's what I learned.
I'd like to offer a couple of resources. Speaking of resources, I have a couple of books. This is called In Their Own Words, and it's by a white woman, Eileen Gunther. The subtitle is Slave Life and the Power of Spirituals. It's a really good book. Peter, have you read it? I see you nodding.
Yes, I have had an autographed copy when it came out from her. I got it at the AGO meeting. It was wonderful.
You have any comments about it?
It's fabulous. That's all I
Thanks.
can say. It is fabulous. Everything she does is fabulous anyway. So that's
Yeah.
great.
So it's really extensive. It really, I learned a lot about slave life, and I learned a lot about spirituals. The other resource I have is Way Over in Beulah Land, and this is by Andre Thomas, who I was lucky enough to meet a year ago. It's called Understanding and Performing the Negro Spiritual, and this is a different take. This is arrangements of spirituals, how spirituals have been put out into commercial music and into the world since slavery. And he has lots of charts, and he has biographies of lots of musicians, lots of arrangers, and it really helps you understand. For instance, I have an arrangement from our church library of There Is a Balm in Gilead by William Dawson. And by reading this book, I learned that William Dawson was born in 1900. I learned a whole bunch of stuff that helps me understand the music. It helps me tell my choir about it, and it helps me tell the congregation about it. And so it's more than just on the bottom here, it says Music Press, Tuskegee Institute, Alabama. So there's a whole story. There's a human being behind William Dawson. So that's
Ruth, I have to thank you for putting my little contextual use of Black worship music into practice.
Well, I have to, because we're doing that all through Black History Month at my church.
Joan, you're muted.
I'm trying to be polite here. Ruth, can you type those into the chat feature?
Sure.
Title and author.
Okay.
And
Can I just say something about There's a Balm in Gilead? Isn't that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s favorite hymn? That was my understanding. So I'm playing it this Sunday, even though it's a week late, but we had snow. So
we have our royalties for spirituals webinar available on our website. So you can go to that resource page, and there's a bunch of resources there.
Also, as a advertisement promo for this, we're having a follow-up to that session next month on the 17th. We'll be having a number of the same presenters who were there, as well as some other people who I've asked to be part of, that will share their experience of seeing royalties for spirituals in practice. So you can see how it has worked for my congregation and how you might be able to consider it for something in yours. But I'm looking forward to it. It's going to be an exciting session.
There's a question from me here. I'm in the same congregation as Dorothy and Dusty, but they're down in Florida right now, and I'm up in Massachusetts. So can you put a little bit of that information also in the chat? Because we've been talking about royalties, and this is my first contact with this group. So just how to get on your mailing list or something, and then get to the website would be really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Toby. Yeah, we might be able to do this other workshop.
I feel as though I should say that this past summer, the UCCMA graciously loaned me to the UCC to do one of their Thursday webinars. And even though I did use some of it to talk about my own website, my own music, I also talked about the UCCMA, and I took people to the website and showed them where the reparations material was on it. And that feels like one of the best things I've done all year, because I think a lot of people in the UCC more broadly care about this, but we're not aware of the UCCMA, or we're not aware about this particular initiative. And so I'm so glad that that has been so well handled on the website. I feel as though if you go to the website that was just put into the chat, you will either see it immediately, or there's also a kind of a resources subpage that it may be on as well.
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
Okay. I would just like to know what you have to say about Black History Month as a concept. Thank you.
Oh boy. How many hours do we have? All right. Our answers, and I understand that all of our answers might be a little different, which is great. I have really mixed feelings about it. I think that having it at all is better than not having it at all. And at the same time, it has a sort of unfortunate rhetorical function. I don't think this is how it is intended, but whenever you take, and actually it's kind of interesting. I also write books, and one of the books I've written that's coming out this year is called Cultural Processes of Inequality. And one of the things I talk about in relation to racism and other forms of inequality is the way that we culturally normalize some groups and kind of render them invisible and make them kind of the taken for granted. And so having Black History Month as opposed to not having it at all is good in that it pushes those of us who are white especially to wrestle with these things and learn things and lift up and celebrate the power and beauty and strength and so on of Black and African American people. And when you need to have a Black History Month, what you are ignoring is that the rest of the year is White History Year. So that is my discomfort about it. It renders whiteness normalized and invisible and taken for granted and all of those things. And so in that sense, it's problematic. And what I think makes it worse is because whatever and whoever is invisible and normalized tends to be whoever's in sort of political and cultural and social power, and this is the sociologist in me talking, it then becomes easy to point to Black History Month and say, see, we're doing better. We're less racist than we used to be. We have Black History Month, as though that were the solution. So in my dream world, we wouldn't need Black History Month because every month would in fact be Black History Month and everyone else's History Month. And we would be much more capable emotionally and cognitively of addressing the complexities of the ways in which all of our histories are wound together. I'll also point out, I'm not going to show you, but underneath the sweater I'm wearing, I have a second sweatshirt because I'm always cold. So in the winter, I double wear. And the sweatshirt I have underneath literally reads Black History is Everyone's History. So that hopefully that gives you some quick answer to the question. But other people might have other perspectives, and they're also welcome here.
Amanda, I have a quick question in that same line of thinking. Any thoughts on Juneteenth?
So again, we all might have different perspectives, and I invite other people to jump in as well. I have heard more Black and African American identified people complain about Black History Month than I have heard complain about Juneteenth. So even though I can see how there are ways that it is sort of, I think, misused or misunderstood or sort of among white people sort of under-theorized or under-examined. But I actually have never had a conversation about it with a member of the Black or African American community in which they've said, gee, I wish we didn't have this. And so at this point in my life, that leads me to think having it is better than not. I do suspect that all of us who are white have more to learn about it and its complexities. you know, but it is an example of lifting up a complex, important, valuable, awkward historical moment. And so for those reasons, I think it's an invitation to us.
Well, and it's new enough that we haven't, white people haven't turned it into tokenism yet. So, there's that. So maybe we can get this one right and do this a little better.
Oh,
Uh,
Yeah, Joe.
an incident that happened here in Connecticut, maybe you can comment on. A church in Enfield, which is a little more rural, a UCC church had a pride service, and two men interrupted the service to protest what was going on. And I think the minister attempted to talk to them. So that's the discomfort, that blatant discomfort. What do you think about that?
Now, when you say a pride service, do you mean like an LGBTQ pride service? So yeah, I mean, one thing I will say, I mean, we are obviously focusing on racism today, and especially on kind of anti-Black racism. But one thing I think we see in the cultural realignment of this era is that the people who are the most openly and loudly uncomfortable about racial diversity and inclusion seem to also be the same people who are uncomfortable about LGBTQ diversity and inclusion, and the empowerment of women, and the valuing of Muslims, and I mean the importance to our society of immigrants, and we could go on. I think just because I'm aware that we're kind of beginning to run short of time, I think the most important thing to say is that any of these kinds of discomfort, I think, exists on a continuum. It may be discomfort that we feel in our guts and never say anything about, and it may or may not inform our actions, but that is sort of maybe the most modest form of it, all the way to literally killing people. I mean, it's a massive continuum. And if we are interested in engaging with discomfort, obviously starting with our own discomfort and our own lives and our own bodies and our own education is really important. But understanding how we can support whoever is being attacked by other people because of those other people's discomfort is part of the work we can do. I don't know how many of you are, I assume most of us here are familiar with the wonderful worship song, God of the Movements and Martyrs, from the North Carolina Council of Churches. And what's lovely about that song is in a couple of places, it literally says, when powers bear down on the helpless, we'll stand in the way. When doorways are blocked, we will lower our friends through the roof. I mean, there's this sense that we are called to work actively for the betterment of all people. And part of that indeed is addressing when the discomfort of others becomes harmful. Obviously, if our own discomfort runs the risk of harming someone, we have to address that too. But I'm guessing many of us on this Zoom are not about to actually go out and commit hate crimes. So what is our role in protecting other people against hate crimes? I think that's a good open question. And again, because I'm mindful of time and I want Jim to have a couple of minutes at the end, let's take maybe just one or two more comments or questions.
I had just as an observation, or one of the practices that I've tried to put in place is that whenever we do a piece of music, either as sometimes I do organ pieces, or if it's a choir piece or something like that, I try and include a little bit of background about the piece or something about it that will provide some context for the people. So yeah, there's a lot of, mention the European Christian music. There's tons of stuff that you can do with that, but I treat it the same way when we do a spiritual. I treat it the same way when we do a piece by Mark Miller, who happens to be a Black composer. I lift them up as a person, as a child of God, as a creator, as something that who's sharing a message, and it evens the playing field, so to speak. It does not, everybody is valued and everybody has a story and something to offer. And I try and make that as my premise behind what I'm doing, regardless of who it's by.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, and in fact, even though that little essay of mine doesn't sort of address contextualizing the European worship music tradition, I suppose in theory, the fullest way to think about this is that all of our music should be an occasion for learning and reflection and pondering and so on. And so even though I've sort of proposed this, especially in the context of Black worship music, there are broader ways to use it. So absolutely, that's awesome. And Jim, I did want to say one quick thing to go back to your very first comment about the discomfort of Oh My Shepherd. My father was a professional songwriter for a while. He's the one who taught me how to write songs and worship music and so on, though. I think he was quite surprised that I turned my energy to worship music. But I played it for him once, and he said, you know, I see what you're trying to do here, but the fact that it never fully repeats, that there are these sort of themes that come up and you think they're going to repeat and then they go somewhere else each time. I don't know how to get a handle on it. And he didn't quite say it makes me uncomfortable, but almost. And I thought, good, it's working, because that is the entire point of how the music for it was constructed. It is in fact supposed to leave us a little bit stranded so that we wrestle. And I will say that writing the text for it was pretty easy, because if you know what you're doing and you know that the original text you're working from, that's not that hard. Writing the music for that was really not sweating blood, but quite painful. Yeah. Barb.
Yes. I live in Rhode Island, and I've been singing for 15 years with a predominantly African-American BIPOC choir. We sing a lot of African-American music. And our mission is reaching people through music and preserving the African-Americans' choral tradition. So I have a stack of like hundreds of pieces of music. One of the things that I would bring up, though, is that we have a covenantal relationship with one of the UCC churches here in Rhode Island. So a lot of their choir members are in our choir. We sing occasionally at their church. We do concerts at their church and so on. And we go out into the community and do concerts. For instance, yesterday or Monday, we sang at the statewide Martin Luther King celebration at a giant Black church over on the west end of Providence. So I just would like your reflections on, you know, I find that that's a really powerful way to get outside of our insular congregations and think about, you know, because there's a whole bunch of people doing this kind of stuff outside of our UCC congregations. And I just like your thoughts on that. Thank you.
100%. I don't think I can really add anything to that. That is a great opportunity for all of us to engage across communities, across faith communities, across racial or kind of neighborhood geographic communities. Yes, nothing more to add about that. And again, I want to be respectful of time. So Jim, I would like to now hand this back over to you to wrap us up. The last thing I will say, though, and I'm sorry, I kind of have to say this, is if you want to engage with Oh My Shepherd again, or any of my all free use worship music, simply go to queersacredmusic.com. Everything's there. It's all free. You're all welcome to use it whenever and however you like. I will put that URL in the chat. Jim, take it away.
Okay, thank you so much, Amanda. Just want to follow on what Barb said. I do see a comment in the chat asking to what the name of your group is, Barbara, and what UCC congregation are you sometimes working with?
The name of the group is Reaching People Through Music, and we call it RPM. And the church that we are associated with is Beneficent Congregational Church in Providence, Rhode Island.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thanks to everybody who chose to participate, and for those who are watching afterwards. I hope you engaged something as well. We engaged a lot of stuff here in person, and thanks again to Amanda for making this all happen. I'd like to just again remind you of the Saturday sharing that we have scheduled for February 17th, where we will revisit royalties for spirituals and update people on what's happened, how we've been using the program, and how it's worked for our congregations. And I'd like to just give a brief synopsis of UCCMA, United Church of Christ Musicians Association. It's a group that has resources and provides different type of seminars and online events and in-person events. We're having our conference in Greenwich, Connecticut in July. Registration will be opening up for that very soon. And please take a look at our website, uccma.wildapricot.org. And it is in the chat if you wanted to go and check that out. There is a free 3-month membership, so you can take part in things and not pay any membership dues for 3 months, and then decide whether it would work for you as something you can gain from. So I'm hoping to see you all again, and bring your friends for February 17th, and we'll see you then. Thank you to Ed and Joan for the technical work behind the scenes here to make this all happen, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.